Good afternoon. I'm Carol Carruthers, your host for today's Speaker Series program. I'm a member of the Undergraduate Research Weeks Council and have been privileged to work with the UCLA Academic Committee for many, many years. Thank you for being with us today on our third virtual Undergraduate Research Week presentation, as we continue to find new ways to showcase our student research programs and highlight some of the very different paths that they've taken to success. I love today's story. From childhood nursery rhymes to Chaucer's tales to Stephen Sondheim's Broadway musicals, bakers have held prominent mention in literature. And in real life, we have lauded Julia Child, looked to Nancy Silverton, and today we herald our very own UCLA baker, Zach Martinucci. Zach grew up in Burlingame, California, up in the Bay Area, and at UCLA, he majored in culinary anthropology and participated in the undergraduate research program through the Lemelson Scholars Research Program and also the Italian department's capstone Carvacci Reynolds Scholarship. Zach first learned about baking. He learned to bake at his dad's cousin's bakery in Bologna, La Chataign. So following field work there in Bologna, he graduated in 2017 with degrees in anthropology and Italian. And then he went on to complete a program at the Professional Bread and Viognier program at San Francisco Baking Institute. In 2018, 1 year after graduation, he founded Rebel Bread, an artisanal bakery in Denver, Colorado, dedicated to inspiring a connection between people and food, one community, one conversation, one bread at a time. In Denver, he presented at Denver Startup Week, serves on the advisory board of the Metropolitan State University Denver Center for Entrepreneurship, and was a finalist in the Trout Tank competition. I'm told that Zach loves telling stories about his passion for culture and food. So Zach, tell us how to build a bakery.
Carol, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's such a pleasure to be back virtually at UCLA today. And I'm so excited to share the story with you all. Like Carol mentioned, I graduated 5 years ago, went to baking school, and then moved to Denver, Colorado to open a bakery. And I want to tell you a bit about how I got here, because my experience as an undergraduate researcher really did set me up and lead me to a career in entrepreneurship. So like Carol mentioned, I grew up near San Francisco in a family that loved to cook and eat. I made a lot of pasta as a teen. I loved working with dough in general, including bread, but I made like really terrible bread as a kid just because I didn't understand how it worked yet. And so when I went to UCLA, I had this love of food and an interest in anthropology. I watched a lot of the TV show Bones growing up and just really wanted to be Dr. Temperance Brennan. And so I was thrilled to see that we had an anthropology department and got to take some classes in that. We didn't actually have a food studies program at UCLA at the time. So my degrees are technically in anthropology and Italian with special fields in anthropology. But I say culinary anthropology because that's a lot easier of saying what I ended up doing, which is to say that I took a food anthropology course early on and learned that we can study food quite seriously to learn about, being an everyday thing that we all make and consume. It teaches us about our economics and our politics and cultures and religions and so on. And in my second year, I got to study abroad in Bologna, Italy, which is one train stop north of Florence in northern Italy. It's this really thriving university town that's had a university there for over 1,000 years. And so I was there just as an exchange student at first, and noticed when I was there that there was a really interesting food scene and I wanted to go back. And so I designed a research project at first through the anthropology department, and also got to work with the Undergraduate Research Scholars Program and my Italian capstone through the Italian department, and designed a fieldwork project where I would do ethnographic fieldwork, which is to say I participated in events and live experiences and recorded what those were like, as well as set up interviews with my participants, who were people throughout the city that make and eat food. I was looking at how local identity was represented through the food that people cook and eat. So this slide is just a handful of people that I got to meet. I was cooking with families and their grandmothers, often in their kitchens at home, to see what they made and what food was important to them. I also got to work with a cooking school and some restaurants. And then I tried to trace their ingredients or their recipes back along the foodway, if you will, to go to the factories and farms where some of the typical products were made. I presented this paper. This is my title slide from 5 years ago at Undergraduate Research Week, where I talked about what it was like, experiencing people's identity through their food, particularly in the face of change. So I talked about tortellini, which come from Bologna, as well as Parmigiano Reggiano cheese and prosciutto, and balsamic vinegar and mortadella. All these foods that, these Italian foods we love come from this one part of Italy. And so I was talking about how people express their identity in the face of change, in particular, now that there's modernization and globalization and lots of tourism, in particular in Bologna, in a place that hadn't been that interesting to foreigners necessarily before. What is it like for people to be holding on to their identities or expressing their identities through their food with tourism? Now, at the same time, I was also learning to bake bread. Like Carol mentioned, my dad's cousin opened a bakery near where we grew up in the Bay Area, actually. And so I got to learn to bake sourdough with him in a cast iron with a sourdough starter, like maybe you or a friend baked during the pandemic. And I was baking a bunch of bread out of my apartment and selling loaves to neighbors, and then started baking flavor loaves of bread based off my friends' personalities. These are some of those photos. This, of course, was like my anthropology connection. And I still believe, but I really noticed in doing this that bread is an excellent canvas for storytelling. I liked the idea that something as simple and universally understood as a loaf of bread, it's like we already know what that is going in. So if I'm going to ask the question, how do my friends show up in the world, which was the base of this project I was just doing for myself, if I'm asking how my friends show up, then I could pick a couple new ingredients to tell that story or express them. And you can really quickly see, looking at loaf to loaf, what stands out among the different loaves, versus if it were like an entire meal or something a little bit more complicated. So I love trying to tell these stories I was learning about baking. And one of my favorites I want to tell you about, actually, I baked a loaf for my Nonna Gloria. This is my Nonna and Nano. And my Nonna Gloria passed away that spring, actually, when I was learning to bake and was baking a lot at home. And so I wanted to bake a loaf of bread to bring to her funeral and to share with my family. And I wanted to do something in her honor and memory. And so I picked the ingredients that she would put in her Sunday roast. It was a loaf of sourdough with, fresh sage and rosemary and roasted garlic and olive oil and salt and pepper. A lot of pepper. If you knew her, enough pepper to make you just cough a little bit would be for her. And I loved being able to share that loaf. And it's a delicious loaf of bread and one that I still love to make and eat, but that it had that story to share with my family. So I was hooked on baking and this idea that bread could even get at more at culture, at stories, at connections to our community. And so I graduated from UCLA and went pretty quickly to baking school, to the San Francisco Baking Institute, to this course on professional bread and viennoiserie, which is like coffee shop pastry, brioche and croissants, and moved pretty quickly after to Denver to try opening a bakery, which I did. It's called Rebel Bread. We've been open for about 4 years now. And we started as mostly a wholesale bakery. That is, we make artisanal loaves of bread and coffee shop style pastries to resell to different coffee shops, some restaurants, some grocery stores in our area. And now we also have a little retail counter that we open on the weekends. We're in 2 really big farmers markets in Denver. We do a bread club where we deliver to people's homes and offer pickup orders. And I also get to teach some baking classes and events. And all of this came to be more or less because of what I learned through research and how I learned what I knew, which is to say that what I want to talk about today is that research really teaches us how to figure things out and how to communicate our worldview. I'm going to tell you a story about a cheese factory and one about a pasta class, and try to let you in on a little bit of how my time as a researcher really influenced what it's meant to become an entrepreneur. Before I go any further, I have to thank my mom. because you have to. Given a stage like this, I want to say thank you to my mom and also to my dad and sister who have been so supportive here. But really specifically, I want to thank my mom because she was the first person to really understand the value of my anthropology degree, probably before I did. And she loved to call me like my second year of college and tell me, I just ran into a friend's mom at the grocery store, and we talked about what you were studying, and they said, oh, anthropology, we thought Zach was going to be like a doctor or a lawyer or something. What's he going to do with a degree in anthropology? And she would be so proud to tell me on the phone. And I told them, with a degree in anthropology, he can do anything he wants. And she's right. And that's what I'm here to tell you. Although I'm not sure I fully understood it at the time either. But right now, I mean, I don't have any business training. I'm considering starting the business, like getting my MBA. And I think that's really feasible, albeit challenging. But I do stand by the value of my social science degree, and I'll add a liberal arts degree or a more harder science degree, because it teaches us how to figure things out. And that my decision to start a bakery at age 23 was knowing that I would not know what to do each step of the way, but I felt confident I would figure out how. And I would tell that to people. I told that to my first staff. I mean, that's how I hoped people would trust me, as I knew I didn't know exactly what I was doing. But from my time as a researcher, from figuring things out as an undergraduate, I was confident I can figure out how to start a business as well. So I want to tell you a story that's just kind of a week of my life in Italy doing field work. Where literally I would walk into most situations every day. I knew I was going to walk into a situation where I would not have the vocabulary for whatever it is I was about to go do. And I was determined to do it anyway and to learn as I go. And I know this is going to be a story about cheese and the Italian countryside, but I hope that it's relatable to you just for how we navigate unfamiliar situations. So a few weeks into my field work, I realized that a lot of my participants, when I was talking to them about the food that they were making, they expressed that the value of their food or the quality was really determined by the quality of the ingredients, and that they put lots of care and attention into sourcing the ingredients. And sometimes those whoever made the ingredients were also regulated by some body that controlled the quality, one of those being a consortium. And in our part of Italy, the most predominant and well-known was the Consorzio for Parmigiano Reggiano, for Parmigiano cheese. So I decided I wanted to book a tour and find my way to a cheese factory to get closer and learn more. So I printed out a list of caseifici of cheese factories or cheese warehouses and sat in a town square like this and just called through this list from top to bottom, trying to book a tour, but I really didn't know what I was asking when I started. I would call a cheese warehouse or cheese factory and say, I was a student and I was a researcher and I wanted to come meet them and learn about cheese up close. And that only got me so far. And a few calls in, they responded with, oh, you want to book a tour? And in that moment, I learned some new vocabulary. I learned the term prenotare una visita. And so now the next call, I could just get to the point and say, buongiorno, io vorrei prenotare una visita. I'd like to book a tour at your cheese factory. And after doing that so many times, one or two, responded yes, and one so casually as to just say, yeah, great, be here at 11. We'll see you Monday at 11 a.m. So happy to make that opportunity for myself, that I could now get closer to the thing I wanted to study. And I want to say it's worth mentioning that at least here, these cheese factories were in like rural countryside Italy, and I got around by foot and by a 50-euro bike that was way too small for me, and on the train. And so I knew that it was going to be a feat even just to show up to some of these places. And I intentionally didn't look up the address when I was calling them because I just wanted the opportunity first. I wanted someone to say, yes, you can come visit. And then from there, I knew I would figure out how to get there. But all that to say, sometimes it's not as simple as just showing up to your office or your lab. Sometimes getting yourself to this opportunity you've made is half the challenge and is what's going to separate you from succeeding here. So I was lucky enough to make a connection at the Consorzio delle Vacche Rosse, which is the Red Cow Consortium. It's a heritage breed of cows that's historically made Parmigiano cheese. And in this one factory, they use milk exclusively from this kind of cow. And I was greeted by this man, the head cheesemaker, with the biggest eyebrows I've ever seen. And he was there to guide me and another Italian student on a tour. And he treated me like a colleague. which is to say that it was a full speed tour in, regular Italian. It was not slowed down for me at all. But we also got to see the entire process from start to finish, and I got to ask whatever questions I wanted along the way. He really opened up this world to me. So I got to see the milk being brought in from the field through the trucks into these giant copper vats or these pots where it's cooked. And once it coagulates, two people, typically two men, would use a giant cheesecloth and literally wrestle the form of cheese, tie it onto a pole so they could hoist it out of the pot so it could set in its form. This is the head cheesemaker again showing this stencil that has little perforations on it that lines the perimeter, the inside perimeter of this cheese mold, so that when the cheese goes in and hardens, this design physically imprints on the exterior rind of the cheese to give it both the brand, that like trademark brand of Parmigiano Reggiano, as well as they add like the batch number, the day it was made, a distinct number that identifies what factory it was made in, and other details. And then once it's solidified, it starts in these molds and then goes into a brine in that lower part of the picture. And then once they're pulled out of there, they go onto warehouse shelves where they sit for 12, 24, 36 months just to age and to develop. And the wind patterns in this part of Italy, they say, like, are the best for aging this particular kind of cheese. So the rooms are set up in a certain way to promote that. And on this tour, I also drank cow rennet, which is like cow stomach intestine lining juice, which is a natural cheese coagulating agent, because the man with the eyebrows said it like puts air in your chest, or whatever longevity expression you want to use. And I almost threw up on the factory floor, but you can't because it's a very clean factory. And I met the cows, and I got to see the cows that make the milk for this kind of cheese. And we went into the warehouse and we tapped on the cheese. This is my favorite picture of him as he's demonstrating that you can hit a wheel of cheese. They use a mallet typically. And based on the sound that it makes, not to me, but to the trained ear, you can tell if there are any defects in the cheese wheel based on the sound it makes when you hit it with this mallet. And if there are any defects, they scratch around the entire cheese wheel to physically deface the brand off of the cheese, because it can no longer be sold as Parmigiano Reggiano because it didn't pass its inspection. We also got to sample cheese, and I was handed like a Tupperware, like what you'd bring leftovers to lunch, filled with Parmigiano cheese that was sickening to try to eat all of it. But I knew it was like $200 worth of cheese, so I really tried to enjoy it. And this is a picture of my field notes where I'm frantically trying to make sense of what I just saw and eating cubes of cheese that are being handed to me. And at the end of the tour, the cheesemaker also recommended some places I go for further research, including other factories and some restaurants that buy their cheese directly from this factory, so I could continue to trace my ingredients as they were making their way to a final product. And I want to point out that that was such a cool connection, because I wouldn't have found that on Google. I mean, that's how I could start my search, but it was relationships like these that led me to much richer parts of my research than I would have been able to find on my own, including to eat one of the best pizza I've ever had at this restaurant just one town over. That this photo and this example ended up making my paper, actually, because this was turned out to be a great example of identity being represented through regional ingredient choices, including the cheese made down the street at this factory. So, did I eat my way across Italy in the name of research? Yes, definitely. But what I'm describing to you, that process is really what most of my ethnographic research looked like. And I hope is relatable in terms of finding your way through unfamiliar situations. I'll get more into that. And actually is quite similar to what a lot of my work looks like as an entrepreneur as I figure out how to create my own business. So I want to break down from that story what I think are 5 takeaways as to how entrepreneurs and how researchers make things happen. The first is that we see problems. Of course, we set out trying to answer a question, or maybe there's a problem we see in the world that we're trying to solve through commerce by creating a business, for example. But beyond the bigger question or problem, we find that there are lots of little steps, little questions we have to answer to get closer to the solution. And so we have to make opportunities for ourselves. It's not enough to just know that, oh, I want to study cheese. Part of my work is to find out how to book that cheese factory tour, how to show up so that I can make an opportunity to get myself closer or in a position where I can ask questions to get closer to the answers I want. And once I've made that opportunity, then I do get to ask questions. That's, of course, what we do as researchers, is ask questions. And what I want to point out is that sometimes we don't even know what we're asking at the beginning, and we learn the vocabulary as we go. In this example, I didn't even know the phrase how to book a cheese factory tour at the very beginning. And by the time I learned that, it allowed me to ask a better question the next time, a more refined question the next time, so that by the end, I'm now like a mini expert on cheese factory tours in Emilia-Romagna, Italy. And that when you start, even if you don't know entirely what you're asking, if you ask and you pick up on the nuances along the way, it will allow you to keep asking better and better questions to improve your research. Next, we dig into our details. So that is that when you do get the opportunity to show up, that you know how to be analytical and critical and really see what's going on and make good note of that. And in this section, I want to make the note too of that showing up sometimes is actually the difficult part. That if it isn't just walking down the street to your lab, maybe you have to get on a train or coordinate an interview and you have to show up somewhere. Sometimes that physically getting yourself there can actually be what is a challenging part of your research, even if we don't talk about it all the time. Next is that we value relationships. Of course, my work is about people and the people's relationships with their food. So people are obviously at the center of what I do. But I want to point out that even if you work with like math or in a science lab, or like, forgive my ignorance of what goes on South Campus, but if you work with a kind of research where you're not studying people directly, I want to point out that people are still involved, that you still have colleagues and maybe a principal investigator, you have roommates, you have friends, and these are all the people that open doors for you, that provide support. They allow you to bounce ideas and to think through things, and that they make the entire experience all that more meaningful. So I want to encourage you to identify the people in your process and to make sure you value those relationships, especially if it's not obvious in what you consider your research to be. And the last thing is that all of this is challenging. It's uncomfortable to walk into a situation where you know you don't have the vocabulary and to show up anyway, but it's how we learn. And so it's important that we get comfortable doing this whole process again and again, because even though it's not always fun, it's rewarding and it's worthwhile, and it's how we accumulate knowledge. And so it's important that we're able to do this as part of our work as researchers or as entrepreneurs. So after spending an entire summer doing this and then completing the academic side, I hope you'll see why I felt confident in figuring things out. That my decision to start a business at age 23 was not because I knew what I was going to do every step of the way, but that I was confident I would figure out how. And that's exactly what I do. That's my job now. And I'll tell you that baking is the easy part, although that's not most of my day-to-day right now. The baking that we do is the easy part of the business. And as an entrepreneur, the most challenging and also important parts of my job are figuring out everything else so that I can make decisions for my team and grow our company. And that's especially challenging as I'm doing it for the first time in a new city. So when I first moved to Denver, within my first year, I was given the opportunity to move into this long, narrow train car of a kitchen that we were told by the former owner was a punk rock space at a punk rock price. And I was working with some friends that were developing their own similar food businesses. And this was actually already a shared kitchen. So we said yes and moved in as new roommates and developed it a little bit into this very home-built bakery. And just to get here, I had to apply for business permits and licenses and figure out how taxes work and inspections with the city. We had to coordinate vendors and wholesale accounts and do marketing. And so all of that was very similar to like navigating the cheese factory bureaucracy, but this time it was in a government building in the city of Denver or with the state of Colorado, or just other agencies I had to go through to make sure we were set up correctly and make connections along the way to actually grow the business one step at a time. All of that was new vocabulary to me that I was learning as I went. These are my first two bakers. This is Sam and Liz, who baked with me for over a year, Liz for about 2 years. And they were my first team. We baked nearly everything together for the first while. And I want to point out that part of my process is I really take care to work every position that we have before I pass it off to someone else so that I can really understand what that role is and articulate it really well as a job description as well as in training for someone else to be able to do a great job in that role. So that means that I was a baker that started at 4 a.m. I was also an evening baker that baked into the evenings towards midnight. I've been a delivery driver, I've done sales, I've learned how to do our social media, and all that so that I could figure out what was going on and ask someone else to do it. That included Sam and Liz at the beginning. And then this is a photo from our first year, some friends and family that came to our first birthday bike ride. And then now, this photo was taken last fall. We're currently a team of about 15 to 20 people that run Rebel Bread day to day. And so much of my growth and learning has been with our staff and figuring out, again, just the logistics of how do we employ all these people? What does the paperwork look like? And what does it look like to provide them a meaningful place to work and good communication, especially in a position where we have to make a product and get it out the door every single day. And there are so many hands that touch that product that need to know what they're doing and be able to work well with their team. Another reality of figuring things out in my world is with equipment. We rely on heavy machinery to help us with a lot of the bakery work that we do. And so we have to figure out what equipment we need, how to get it to us. Our door is 33 inches wide. So sometimes the challenge again is literally getting that piece of equipment inside the door. And inevitably things break. If you can tell me what this photo is at the end, you can win a prize. But a lot of the things I show up to that we have to solve are something like this. Something's gone wrong. We don't know what it is and have to figure out who can repair it for us or how are we going to repair it ourselves. And that includes then showing up places like a motorcycle supply parts store 4 cities over where I am totally out of place, picking up a motorcycle chain because that's what our dough mixer needs to keep running. And even when there's an instruction manual involved, and of course this is a metaphor, but I literally mean like when there's an instruction manual for a piece of equipment that we have, we still have to interpret it and figure out what to do next. And even when the instructions are right there for us, there's still so much we have to do to make things happen. I'm going to show you some pictures of my team just because these are fun. And all this is to say that just my job as an entrepreneur, if we're going to take the last story as a metaphor, is to find my way to the cheese factory. It's to get myself there. It's to learn from the man with the eyebrows. It's to be able to figure out all those pre-steps along the way so that I can make decisions that support my team and help grow our business. And when we do that a little bit each day, it grows. And so now nearly 4 years in, one of my favorite parts of what we do is that we have a really popular farmers market bakery. One of my goals when I started was to have the really cool farmers market bakery that I remembered from my childhood dreams. And I'm really fortunate that we sell out nearly every week at 2 very busy markets in Denver. This is the line that we're fortunate to have. That photo's from last week, actually. So I'm going to pause there on the business side because that does bring us up to the present, and I'll get to talk more with Carol at the end. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to speak more to the business side of things. What I also, excuse me, Carol, there is more. I'm just transitioning.
Go ahead.
I also want to talk about how I use research to communicate my world of food and culture. So I still consider myself an anthropologist, but I'm not an academic. I don't publish papers. If you're a professor in the crowd, I'm not trying to knock off academia. I understand what you do, and I admire what you do, and I don't do that. But what I do consider myself is a popular anthropologist, popular being of the people in this case. And so I really like to be the gateway to meaningful conversations around our food. I want to spark curiosity and a deeper understanding with people's connection to their food, and maybe even show people that they can turn to something like academic research to understand the world. So I don't usually talk about how bread is an excellent canvas for storytelling, because that's like a little kooky at first glance. And I don't usually talk about my fieldwork in the farmer's market line, because that doesn't always feel relevant there. But what we do is express it through the food that we cook and eat. So I want to tell you again about that Nana G loaf that I introduced at the beginning that we made in honor of my grandmother, because this is one of those things that works on both levels. Food should be delicious and accessible and something that people want to eat. And that's always what we try to make. And if you want to know more, we're here for that too. That this loaf that we're so fortunate to make every day also has, it's a great Italian garlic herb loaf of bread. And it has a cool story behind it as well, if you care to hear about the woman that inspired it and why we're so happy to make it every day. And we do. Now it's on our menu all the time. It's available at 2 grocery stores every day of the week. We sell it in our bread club at our retail counter. It sells out very early at farmers markets each weekend as well. And that means that, one of the coolest parts of my growth here is that circled shelf there is a shelf that every day at this grocery store has a loaf of Nana G on it. And it means that every day for about an hour, our kitchen smells like Nana Gloria is there cooking as we bake that loaf of bread. And I encourage our bakers to do the same as they're working on specials, to take our base loaf of sourdough or a croissant as their canvas, and to change up the flavors for whatever story they're trying to tell or just idea they're trying to express through the flavor choices they're making. And most of our menu works on that level, where we hope that everything we bake is something delicious that you'll want to eat. And if you care to know more, there's a story behind it too. The other venue that I get to work with is cooking classes, where I make space for these conversations. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about a gnocchi class at the end, but I want to start just by saying that these classes have gotten to take so many different forms. We make some bagels at the bakery, including a giant family style bagel. So we've taught people how to make those. We've partnered with breweries to bring the bagels there. I've taught other passionate cooks in the area to teach their own classes and share their stories with us. And sometimes this looks like a 6 or 8 person cooking class. And one time it was even at a wedding reception, because a friend of the bakery asked if we would do one of our teaching events for 60 guests as their wedding, which is a really cool experience. This is an event my friend Emily came up with called Butter Aerobics, where you dance with a little container of cream until it is whipped into butter, which is a fun and educational experience. And of course, we've taught lots of bread, from challah braiding to sourdough, and we've translated them in the pandemic to teach things virtually, including a week-long sourdough class called Camp Bread that we're still running. We've run a number of times, and it's turned out to translate really well to a virtual platform. And I love that we get to teach it in real time, over 6 days, that is, which is the time you need to go from just a bowl of flour and water to a finished loaf of bread on the 6th day. And I'm actually teaching a session of Camp Bread in a couple weeks in June, if you're interested. Now, I want to tell you, just give an excerpt, about Make Gnocchi Like an Italian Grandmother, which is my first class, one of my favorites. This is a photo from my friends and family dress rehearsal in 2018, because I love making gnocchi. I love eating gnocchi. And by the way, if you take nothing else from this hour, please be confident ordering gnocchi the next time you go to an Italian restaurant. We're going to review the pronunciation here. It's a ñ sound, a long O, and then a hard chi at the end. It's 2 syllables, gnocchi, and the I at the end makes it plural in Italian. The singular form is an O. Gnocco is just one dumpling, and that's what the word means. It means dumpling. It doesn't specifically refer to the potato gnocchi that we're used to eating. There are actually lots of different kinds of gnocchi, of different kinds of dumplings made across Italy. And so we talk about this in class. We go over the pronunciation. I talk about the Italian grandmothers that I interviewed to learn about the cultural and historical context of gnocchi. And then I share my thesis for the class, because I have a thesis for every cooking class, because I'm a cross between an Italian grandmother and a professor. And all that is to say is that I have a claim that I'm going to make about pasta, which for this class is that gnocchi are a simple, inexpensive, and impressive dish to make at home, even on a weeknight. And I know that the weeknight part is the challenge, right? That's where people get a little defensive, because this seems like something that's really complicated to make. But this is a thesis. This is my claim, something I believe to be true about pasta. And for the next 2.5 hours, I'm going to cook some pasta. I'm going to tell some stories. And at the end, I hope you will also believe this to be true. So that's what we do. We make a potato gnocchi dough from start to finish. We make a few different sauces, and I often change up the sauces from the classes and talk about why I chose those or what their significance or their history is. And one of my favorites to make, that I try to make in every gnocchi class, is called gnocchi macanode, which is a cinnamon, sugar, butter, Parmigiano cheese pasta dish. So sweet, savory, but cinnamon, sugar, and Parmigiano. And it's not really a recipe you can Google. I consider macanode to be one of the gems I found in my primary source work, if you will, and that it comes out of the writings of Edda Servi-Macklin, who is a cultural historian that grew up as a young Jewish girl in the early 1900s in Pitigliano, an Italian Jewish little hilltop Tuscan town that's been a safe haven for Jews for hundreds of years. And we know a lot about life in this town from Edda's writings. And so I talk about this recipe and the history of Jews living in Italy for thousands of years. And we look at the recipe and talk about how we can tell if an Italian recipe is also Jewish based on the ingredient choices or the traditions around when we eat it, or maybe the way the recipe's been modified to adhere to kosher laws. And I get to have this Julia Child moment for myself where I'm stirring a pot of butter, sugar, Parmesan cheese, and get to close by acknowledging how something as simple as pasta can connect us across cultures, communities, and generations. And almost always, someone out loud says, huh, culinary anthropology. And that's my favorite moment because I did it. Because I'm hoping they understood. And I tricked them because they thought they were coming to like a wine and paint night where we were just going to have fun cooking pasta. And we did. It is fun and it's delicious. And I also want to give the experience to show what happens when we think critically about the food that we cook and eat. And that's what I hope for you too, that you get to have those moments, that you recognize the value in your undergraduate research because of the way it teaches you to see the world. Because as a researcher, you see problems that you want to solve and you make opportunities for yourself to get closer to the answer. In those spaces, you ask questions and you're willing to learn the vocabulary as you go so that you can continue to ask better and better questions. You dig into the details to get yourself to those research opportunities and think critically and analytically about what they mean. You value the relationships along the way, knowing that the people involved in your research make everything that much more meaningful. And you're comfortable doing this again and again, because that's the process. And that's how we learn. And that when you finish your undergraduate research and you go out into the world, you get to go out with a sense of curiosity paired with an understanding of the scientific process, some experience with the scientific process. And all of that is what makes the world a more thoughtful place. Thank you so much for listening to me talk today. It's been such a pleasure to speak here. I just want to add, if there's anything we don't get to talk about here, you're welcome to reach out and I'm happy to continue conversations. Carol, welcome back.
Thank you. That was marvelous, Zach. Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful stories, your family, the tour of Italy. I'm very hungry already and eager to try gnocchi. So we do have some time, I think, for some questions. One of the ones that has come in was, and it was so evident in all your pictures about your staff, about how do you build a culture in your company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've tried to think about that from the beginning. At the beginning, when it's just me, it starts with just how do I show up and how do I lead by example and treat my peers the way hopefully they want to be treated or I want our workplace to be. And as we've grown, and I'll say that is that we work together like friends, that we're direct with one another, but we understand that we're on the same page and are open about our communication, that we're a creative place to work, that we think outside of the box, all these values essentially, right, that just start with me. And then as I've gotten to hire people along the way, I've tried to pick people that I thought would be great representations of that would work really well in that environment. And we've had a great culture the whole time because of that, I think, because we picked the right people, not just because they were good at baking bread, but that they fit in really well with what we were trying to do as an organization. And now in the last couple of months, actually, my leadership team and I have identified our core values. One is speak to each other as friends, everything we just talked about, actually, so that we could write them down, not to try to change the culture by writing them on paper, but so that now we can hire, and when we hire people, we can look to that list and say, this is really what matters to us, and this is who we're looking for, and how we expect people to show up at work. I hope that answers the question.
Beautifully, wonderfully, thank you. Along that lines, how did you, this is a good one, how did you find the discipline and motivation to build a business in a competitive, cutthroat environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I want to turn it a bit by saying that I don't feel like it's cutthroat and competitive day to day, or I wouldn't be doing it. And I'm speaking at least for small business, which is to say that our business works because we have a really supportive community in Denver that we want to participate in, and in turn, the community wants to support us. And so while I do make decisions that are like based on our numbers, or that are maybe feel more of the like, I do this in a vacuum, it's more competitive in nature. I'm trying to make the best product that will bring in money and lower our costs or whatever. All the actual significant things that have grown our business have been through our relationships in the community. That is, a friend of a friend has found the kitchen that we're renting now, or has gotten us into a farmer's market, or has helped us out on a day that the freezer broke, whatnot. So those moments that could be really trying and challenging have always worked out or been made easier by our community connections. And so for those reasons, it feels, hopefully, at least in my experience, it doesn't have to feel super competitive day to day. And that's what allows us to keep going.
Fabulous. Along that lines, here was the question that has come in the question and answer. And if out there have questions, please do drop them into the question and answer the area there. At what year did your business become profitable, and where did you get the initial capital to start your business?
Ooh, good technical question.
Yeah.
If for those of you that have technical business questions, I'm happy to talk offline as well. But I'll tell you, in the third year, now the pandemic started like a year and a half in. So it's kind of this interesting case study where our business changed a lot during the pandemic. By the end of the third year, we were able to not turn a profit in the sense that we're like making tons of money, but are bringing in a little bit more than we're spending, so to speak. So at the beginning, that's a longer, there's more to that I think I didn't know entirely how that worked at the beginning. And I see now that over the years, it can continue to grow and become more profitable. We were also profitable at the very beginning, which is just to say that when I was working for myself, I was just paying for like rent, ingredients, and me. And you can do it that way, but I was trying to grow an organization. So part of our debt has been from wanting to invest in other people to do the work and not just pay me to bake all the product. At the beginning, we just had very, very small loans from friends and family. It started with $6,000 that my dad was very gracious to lend me that I've since paid back. And that essentially bought us our first round of ingredients and our first months of rent, so that at the beginning we could just bootstrap it. That is, use the money we had to make enough product and sell it, and then use the money from that product to buy the next round of ingredients, and just keep doing that. It's essentially like a giant lemonade stand. And I do encourage you to give that a try, especially if you're younger or still figuring out your idea, because we learned a lot about what our business was actually supposed to become the more that we made our product and were out there in the world. As we grew and as a business grows, you also have opportunity for more capital if you're interested in taking on loans or investor debt or anything else, whatever kind of growth you need. And I'm happy to talk more about that elsewhere.
Great. Thank you. Tama said she appreciated seeing your Nona's bread, which was wonderful, a wonderful story. But she asked, what is your bread, Zach?
It's funny is I don't bake these. I called them persona loaves at the time. We don't really bake them as Rebel bread right now. They're much too time intensive to bake individual personality loaves, although some of our main menu loaves, like the Nanaji, were inspired by that. I haven't baked my loaf of bread in years, but I did make one in college when I was doing this that I believe had cold brew and dark chocolate and candied hazelnuts in it, which I think, if I'm remembering right, was a spin on it being sophisticated and also a little nutty. And those were just ingredients that I liked as well and wanted to eat in bread.
I hope you have a whole customized line of breads that people can get. I know you did that for your friends as well. I have a question.
Yeah.
Why Rebel bread?
Yeah.
Rebel bread.
Thank you. We do get asked that all the time. Rebel came from the idea of wanting to do things differently, not in an active, up in arms rebellion, but just in subtle ways that we could be a different kind of community or neighborhood bakery. That started with going to baking school, and like the flavored loaves of bread, they specifically said, not to me directly, but just in general, like, don't put stuff in the bread. That's trash. People aren't going to like that. And I'm sitting there like, oh, I'm going to sell a lot of these. This is going to be fun. And there were so many recipes that maybe weren't part of the like traditional baking canon, but we wanted to give it a try. And it's also evolved to mean I wanted to be a different kind of place to work for our employees. I've talked about our culture already, and our industry, unfortunately, sometimes gets a bad rap for being more of a toxic workplace than not. Totally depends on the company, but I set out to really try to be a positive place that could support our people and also be involved in our community. So all those things were meant to be just a little bit different, maybe, than what you'd normally think about when you go to start a bakery.
Great. I loved your wonderful slides about the steps for entrepreneurship. Is there any other advice you'd like to offer to our budding entrepreneurs?
Sure. My favorite starting advice is just that was given to me, and that is my favorite to give, is just to get out there and try something. That is to do a version of your business that you can do today. That's the advice, which is maybe you have a plan for, in my case, it was, I want to open this bakery that will require a lease and commercial baking equipment and things that I don't have in my apartment right now. But is there a version of that business I can try today just to start getting experience and feedback and see how it feels, even to be out on my own doing this? So for me, that was selling loaves of bread in coffee shops on Saturday mornings. And I wasn't going to make a living selling 4 loaves of bread in a coffee shop, but it was a way for me to meet the owners of the coffee shop and make connections, and to have real people that I didn't know pay for the loaf of bread and taste it and give feedback and see what our target demographic might be like, and just be a part of the community that we were going to sell to. So all that is to say, if there's a version of your business you can do today for what you have at home already, or like a very small amount of money, go out and do that, because it's going to teach you more about what the bigger picture actually looks like. It might even open up some next steps for you to naturally fall into.
If you were to start a business again, this is a question, what would you do differently?
Oh boy. Oh, I mean, on the one hand, like I'm happy with what's happened. For as many mistakes or failures or whatever along the way, we've failed in a way that it was small enough that we could learn and keep growing from it. Oh, that's really tough. The answer I'm thinking of is, I would love to do it again being older, in that I would love to go in with experience and money and start a business then. And I get asked sometimes, this question kind of takes the form of like, when do you know it's time to start a business or you're ready to? And I want to add, I'm really happy I did it when I did, and figured it out along the way, because that's what I wanted to do. But for some people, it makes more sense to go work for a bunch of other companies and get experience and save up money and do it that way. And I see the value in that so much that if I were to do it again, I'd consider that as well. But I think both answers are right. It's just a personal choice.
So as an entrepreneur, what would be your next business? What are you going to do next?
Well, I really love the education aspect of what we do. I will say, I talked about baking classes, and we've done some virtually as well. And that has been more of a side project for me within Rebel Bread, as in our team does not support that. And that's still more of a hobby that I do because I enjoy it. And so I would love to dedicate some more effort to the education piece, to really going full force into teaching America how to bake bread. And I don't know if that's an extension of what we do or another business, but that's probably the next thing I'd have in mind.
So as part of a master class, can those of us virtually or remotely be able to take your classes?
Yes, and actually, I do have a slide for this, although I will say, Carol didn't know about this. We're not just advertising this, but I am teaching Camp Bread in June. So this is, again, the answer I just gave is I'd love to do more classes and see what that looks like. But the one class we are running a couple times a year right now is called Camp Bread. It's a sourdough class, which is more or less a master class, in that we start at the beginning of the week with just flour and water in a Tupperware container, and we make a sourdough starter and talk about how that works. And by the end of the week, we bake bread together. So if you're interested in learning to bake, it really applies to all kinds of bread. It's all bread works the same way. So this will teach you how to bake any kind of bread, but sourdough specifically, this is a masterclass style course you could take with me. And hopefully in the future, we'll have more opportunities as well. Thanks for letting me share that.
you. I'll sign up right away. And one of the questions that came in certainly, and it's one about when are you going to start a business? When are you going to bring Rebel Bread to Los Angeles?
Did my mom ask that?
No,
I get asked that a lot. It's usually asked when about the Bay Area. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's very flattering. I'm not sure if you or someone you know wants to present like a franchise growth opportunity. I would love to consider it. Although the business I'm working on right now, I think is really meant to be in Denver. I think Rebel Bread is a Denver-based business. So there aren't current plans to expand that yet, but I love the brand. I think it could do well elsewhere. And I appreciate you saying that or thinking about what our growth could look like.
absolutely. I think, I don't know what Denver has that we don't have, but it's we'll look forward to that certainly, and really hope to do it. Samantha, were there any other questions that have come in that we have time for? How are we doing? There was more down there. Will you resume your podcast, Zach? You tell us about your podcast.
Thank you for that question. That is a deep cut too. I told a version of this story. I started a podcast called Against the Grain that you can find on our website on rebelbreadco.com in the blog section. That was telling the beginning story of starting the bakery. If you enjoyed kind of my story of, well, how the setup looked like, I recorded a weekly podcast to really talk about that first year. And I love that. I love telling that story and I would love to return to it. It's just was a fun hobby that I don't have a lot of extra time for or I'm not making a lot of extra time for right now. So hopefully the next time I have some space and maybe we have like a pivot story to share, I'd love to return to it. But thank you for your interest, Erica.
Yes, that was great.
I'm seeing another chat question, Carol. Do you see that?
So look in the chat. No, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I'm reading a question that says, what was your experience in baking school like compared to your experience at UCLA? That's a great question. So baking school, my particular program was a 3-month program, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. But just a couple months to learn to bake bread professionally, or more specifically to learn how to run a production bakery. So we were learning how to bake bread, but with the intention of doing it at a high volume or being able to understand how bread worked at that volume. We had classroom time. There was like a lecture most mornings, especially at the beginning, and then there was laboratory time. So in some ways, it worked like a UCLA science class where you'd have like a lecture and then a lab section. Although, of course, half of our hours at a time to even full days towards the end were dedicated to just baking in the kitchen. My favorite part about baking school, about the way they set up the education, was that it was set up like a science experiment, where on the first day, we made baguettes. We made like a control baguette. They called it the improved formula, which was just like, this is a really reliable loaf of bread that we can make. Every day we make this, it's going to come out more or less the same. And then the next day, we would make the control baguette again, and we would make the same recipe with a little more water and a little less water. And we would see how they turn out and learn about how does hydration then, the amount of water in the dough, affect the finished product. And then the next day we would do it with fermentation time, but not with water, right? So we're just changing one variable at a time. And that really allowed you to see all the different variables that go into baking, either to troubleshoot mistakes or to know as a baker what all the choices you can make are to affect your finished product. Because you can do it for flavor, but a lot of the times we make choices around our schedule or the ingredients for the sake of our schedule or to make the workday easier on our employees. So anyway, all that to say is we give the same advice to our home bakers. And the takeaway from baking school is, if you're doing any home baking, I recommend you treat it like a science experiment where you bake something that you know is going to turn out reliably, even if it's not your favorite thing, and then change one variable the next day and see what happens and record that in a notebook or in a spreadsheet, and continue to change one variable at a time so you can get an understanding of how those changes affect what you're working on.
I think we're almost out of time, Zach. I'm so sorry because this has been fascinating. But we do thank you so much for sharing your insights, your wonderful teaching. You're a great teacher, and to share your family and your experience with all of us.
Thank you so much for having me, Carol, and for talking today.
I want to thank also our UCLA research community and to our research center directors, Tama and Whitney, the faculty, the staff, and our supporters, all of whom make this undergraduate research work possible. There's one more speaker series that is coming up tomorrow. It's the last one of the week. It's Professor Dejan Farmer talking about For the Love of Science. We've been talking about science and it's a part of everything really. So I invite you to stay tuned and please do go check out all the wonderful, marvelous, exciting array of student presentations that are up on the website. Just click anything and you'll be in for an experience. So meanwhile, Zach, thank you so much. It's been great fun and I think a great inspiration for all of us in every way. Thank you. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone.